It started with a simple ache in my lower back. I'm David, a 45-year-old accountant who's always been known for two things: my reliability and my quiet resilience. For over 20 years, I handled numbers and clients with the same methodical calm I brought into my marriage. I never imagined that something so physical, so persistent, could dismantle the structure of my life. At first, I ignored the pain. I chalked it up to long hours hunched over spreadsheets. Then came the fatigue, an exhaustion so heavy I'd fall asleep at my desk, unable to finish tasks that once took me minutes. My appetite vanished. Even simple meals tasted like ash. My wife Claire noticed. She asked if I was stressed. I told her it was just work. That was easier than saying, "I'm scared something is wrong." Eventually, I saw a doctor, then a specialist. Blood tests, scans, biopsies. Each appointment layered more silence between Claire and me. She came to the first two, then started sending her apologies instead. "I have a client dinner," she said once. Another time, "Do you really need me there?" The diagnosis came on a rainy Thursday morning. A rare autoimmune condition, chronic, debilitating, manageable but only with treatment, lifestyle changes and time. The doctor's voice was calm, clinical. Claire's reaction wasn't. She stared ahead, lips tight, eyes cold. In the car ride home, she didn't speak. I stared out the window, watching raindrops streak down the glass. I wanted to reach for her hand, I didn't. That night I tried to be optimistic. I told her we'd get through it, that I'd adapt, work less, rest more. She nodded slowly, but didn't look at me. When I touched her arm, she flinched like my fingers were fire. I began to notice small changes. Her phone was always face down. She left the room to take calls. She started working late, coming home after I was already in bed. But I didn't confront her. Not yet, because part of me still believed that love could survive anything, and I wasn't ready to admit that something inside her had already given up. The silence between us became routine. Claire and I had always lived a quiet life, but now the quiet wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating. She moved through the house like a guest, not a wife. Meals were eaten with phones in hand. The TV was always on, as if we were both trying to avoid hearing each other breathe. At first I told myself it was the stress. Maybe she was just scared, overwhelmed by my diagnosis. I was certainly overwhelmed. The medication left me groggy and bloated. My body was slower, clumsier. I struggled with stairs. Some mornings my joints locked up so badly I needed help dressing, but she didn't ask how I was feeling anymore. One evening I was in the kitchen trying to open a jar of soup when my hand gave out. The glass slipped, crashed onto the tile. She didn't come in. I cleaned it up alone, fingers trembling from pain and frustration. When I limped into the living room, she was scrolling through her phone, barely looked up. "You okay?" she asked, voice flat. "Yeah, just dropped something." She nodded and turned back to her screen. There was no anger in her. That's what scared me. No concern, no arguments. Just a slow, quiet erasure, like I was being faded out of the picture, one pixel at a time. At night, she slept with her back to me. I stopped trying to touch her, stopped trying to talk. I started pretending I was asleep before she even got into bed. I found myself rehearsing conversations in my head, ways to ask her what was going on, why she was pulling away, but I never said them out loud, because deep down I already knew she wasn't just tired, she wasn't just distant. She had stopped seeing me, not just the sick version of me, but the man I had always been. And I realized then, the loneliness wasn't coming from the illness. It was coming from the person I loved most. It happened on a Thursday night. I had made dinner, something simple, since my energy levels were low. Just roasted chicken and steamed vegetables. I even lit a candle, trying to create some version of warmth we hadn't felt in months. Claire walked in late, tossed her bag on the counter, and gave me a half smile. "You didn't have to cook," she said, not really looking at the food. "I wanted to," I replied gently. "It's been a while since we had dinner together." She sat down, barely touched her plate. I tried to keep the conversation light, asking about her day. Her answers were clipped, generic. Meetings, emails, traffic. I pushed a little further. "I was thinking maybe we could go away this weekend. Just us. Somewhere quiet. You remember that cabin near Lake Glenmore?" She didn't even hesitate. Didn't look up. "That's not going to fix this, David." I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. She finally looked at me, and I'll never forget the coldness in her voice, in her eyes. "You're not the man I married," she said, just like that, like a diagnosis. "You used to be full of life. Now, you're tired, you're weak, you just sit around all day." I sat there, stunned. The food on my tongue turned to sand. My throat tightened. I wanted to defend myself, to remind her of the doctor's visits, the medication, the fatigue that came with fighting something I didn't ask for. But no words came out. I just looked at her, and she looked past me. Without another word, she pushed her plate away and stood up. "I'm going to bed," she said. "I have an early call." I didn't follow her, didn't argue. I just sat there at the table, in front of a cold dinner and a colder truth. That night, I didn't sleep. And by morning, something inside me had shifted. Not in anger, but in understanding. She wasn't mourning the man I used to be. She was already gone. 3 days later, she left. It wasn't dramatic. There were no tears, no shouting. Just a note on the kitchen counter, folded once, with my name written in her handwriting. Sharp, deliberate, distant. "David, I need to breathe. I can't do this anymore. I'm sorry." I stared at the paper for a long time, trying to absorb its simplicity. I opened the bedroom door and saw the empty space where her suitcase had been. A few drawers half open, her scent still lingering faintly on the pillow. I should have been angry, but all I felt was hollow. My body was failing, and now so was the last thread of my support. My wife, the person who had once promised to stand by me in sickness and in health, had simply opted out. Later that same day, my body gave up. I was walking to the bathroom when a sudden wave of dizziness hit. My knees buckled, and I collapsed on the floor, breath shallow, vision blurred. I don't know how long I lay there before I managed to crawl to my phone. The paramedics came quickly. I remember the sirens, the questions, the fluorescent lights of the hospital. I remember someone asking if I had family to call. I gave them my sister's number. Claire didn't even cross my mind. I was admitted immediately. My condition had worsened. An autoimmune flare-up, the doctor said. I needed to stay under observation, receive treatment, rest. Rest. What a cruel word when everything inside you is unraveling. The hospital room was small, quiet. Machines beeped steadily. The nurses were kind. My sister visited as often as she could, but the hours dragged. There's a loneliness in hospitals that creeps into your bones. I stared at the ceiling, thinking about the day we got married, about our vows, about how sure she had looked when she said, "I'll never leave you." And now, lying there under sterile sheets, tubes in my arm, I understood something. Some people don't break promises. They just quietly walk away from them and never look back. In the hospital, time lost meaning. Days blurred into one another, marked only by the rhythm of nurses checking vitals and the soft hum of medical equipment. I stopped counting hours. I stopped expecting messages. Claire didn't call, not once, and I didn't call her either. The silence between us, once unbearable, had settled into something else entirely. Acceptance, maybe, or numbness. I began writing during those quiet hours, not to pass the time, but because I needed to get something out of me, something unsaid, something unresolved. I didn't start with any plan, just a blank page and a pen borrowed from the nurse's station. At first, the words came slowly, fragments of thoughts, memories, feelings I hadn't allowed myself to voice. But soon, they took shape, and the letter started. It wasn't a plea for her to come back. I wasn't writing to win her over or explain myself. I was writing to let go, to say what I hadn't said when I should have, to acknowledge the betrayal, not just of her absence, but of her indifference. I wrote about the nights I lay awake, listening to her breathe beside me, wondering when she stopped loving me. I wrote about the soup jar that shattered on the floor, about how I pretended I was asleep, so I wouldn't hear her choose silence over comfort. And then I wrote about the thing I had never told her, the truth I had discovered before I got sick. She thought I didn't know, but I did. Finishing that letter didn't feel like revenge. It felt like clarity, like naming a wound before it could heal. I folded it carefully and placed it in the drawer beside my hospital bed. I told the nurse, Melissa, to send it only if I didn't wake up from the next treatment, or if I did wake up when I told her to. "Is it for your wife?" she asked gently. "No," I said quietly. "It's for the person I thought she was." And that night, for the first time in weeks, I slept without dreams. The letter wasn't just about pain. It was about truth. Before my diagnosis, before the exhaustion and hospital rooms, There had already been signs, whispers of something wrong that had nothing to do with my health. Claire had been distant long before I got sick. Her laugh stopped reaching her eyes. Her phone, once left carelessly on counters, became an extension of her hand. She was always typing, always smiling at something she wouldn't share. One evening, about a month before everything changed, she left her phone charging in the kitchen. She was in the shower. I wasn't snooping, I swear I wasn't. But it lit up. 3 messages from a contact saved as Eric, old friend. The first read, "Still thinking about last night." The second, "He suspects anything?" The third, "Can't wait to see you again." I stood there, my hand frozen above the screen. I didn't open the thread. I didn't need to. The truth didn't always need confirmation. Sometimes it was in the tone, the timing, the gut punch. I could have confronted her that night. Could have demanded answers, but something stopped me. Pride, maybe, or exhaustion, or fear of how easily she'd lie to my face. So, I did nothing. I copied the messages, took screenshots, sent them to myself, created a folder called Quiet Things, and saved them there. And then I got sick. What followed felt like watching someone escape a burning house and leave you inside. Her detachment, her absence, it all made sense. She had already left me long before her suitcase rolled down the hallway. In the letter I told her I knew, not with anger but with precision. I described the night I saw those messages, the dinners she skipped, the weekends she suddenly needed space. I never mentioned Eric again in the letter. I didn't need to. I just wrote one final line. "You didn't break me with your silence, Claire. I had already broken the moment I realized you could smile at someone else the way you used to smile at me." And with that truth on paper, I felt lighter. I had carried her secret for too long. Now it was hers to hold. Writing the letter gave me peace, but peace wasn't the end of it. I still had choices to make, ones that would define what came next, long after the pain settled and the hospital walls were behind me. Claire and I never had children. Our lives were centered on career, travel, brunches with friends, curated routines, the kind of life that looks beautiful from the outside, but is hollow when tested. Everything we owned was in both our names, the apartment, the savings, even the vacation house near the coast, but I had time in that hospital bed, time to think, time to decide what mattered. So I made calls, spoke with my lawyer, adjusted the will. It wasn't an act of revenge. I didn't want to punish her. I wanted to realign the truth of my life with the reality I now saw so clearly. I left the apartment to my sister, who had sat beside me through every IV drip and doctor consultation. The vacation house went to Mark, a friend of 20 years who had brought me groceries and stayed past visiting hours just to talk. My savings were split among charities I believed in and a scholarship fund I created in my parents' names. Claire got nothing, not out of spite, but because she had already left. She had unchosen me. I was just doing the same, but with more grace. In the letter, I explained it clearly. You were once my entire world. I built everything around us. But when I needed a partner, you became a shadow. So I've rebalanced the scales, not to hurt you, just to reflect what's true. I folded the updated will and slipped a copy inside the envelope with the letter. Melissa, the nurse, asked again if I was sure. I nodded. If I don't wake up, send it. If I do, I'll tell you when. She didn't ask questions. There was no drama, no grand gesture, just quiet decisions made in the stillness of a hospital room. And for the first time in a long while, those decisions felt like mine. I spent 3 more nights in the hospital. The treatment finally began to work. The inflammation receded, the fatigue eased slightly, and the color started to return to my face. The doctors were cautiously optimistic, but the road ahead was still uncertain. They spoke in careful phrases. Long-term management, closely monitored, responsive for now. But my thoughts weren't on my health anymore. They were on the drawer beside my bed. Inside it was the letter, folded neatly, sealed in a plain envelope. No dramatic words on the front, just her name, Claire, written in my handwriting, steady, deliberate, final. On the morning of my discharge from the ICU, I called Melissa. "I want you to send it now," I said. She nodded. There was a brief pause before she asked, "Are you sure?" I looked at the window. The sunlight felt warmer than it had in weeks. Outside, a tree moved gently in the wind, alive and indifferent to everything we carry. "Yes," I said. "I'm sure." She took the envelope and slipped it into her bag. I didn't ask how or when she'd send it. I trusted her to handle it. That was the moment I realized I wasn't angry anymore. The bitterness had burned out somewhere between the IVs and the sleepless nights. What was left wasn't vengeance. It was clarity, a line drawn between who I had been and who I was choosing to become. Claire would read my words, and maybe they'd land like a stone in her chest, or maybe she'd brush them off and go on pretending. That wasn't my concern anymore. This wasn't about her. It was about reclaiming a voice I had given up long before the illness, long before the hospital. I packed my things slowly. My sister came to pick me up. We didn't talk about Claire. We didn't need to. As I walked out of that building, something inside me stayed behind. Something heavy, something I no longer wanted to carry. And in its place, a strange calm. Quiet. Absolute. The kind of calm that comes only after you've said everything that needed to be said. I waited for something, maybe not a response, but a ripple, a reaction, a text, a call, even a cold, formal reply. Anything that showed she had read the letter, that she had seen what I had finally, after all that silence, chosen to share. But days passed, then a week. Nothing. Claire vanished like she had lived with me those final months, quietly and without acknowledgement. I checked my inbox, my voicemail, the front door. Each time, a small part of me expected some gesture, an apology, an explanation, maybe even a denial. But all I found was stillness, and then I remembered. That was who she had become. I logged into one of her old social media accounts, one we had set up together years ago but never deleted. It was public. I don't know what I was looking for. A clue, maybe. A post that hinted at guilt or reflection. Instead, there was a photo of her at a wine bar, smiling, holding a glass. The caption read, "New beginnings." No mention of me, no shadow of the letter, just another curated moment for the world to see. Another day in the life of someone who had already moved on. I sat there in front of the screen, not hurt, just confirmed. I hadn't written that letter for her to react. I'd written it because I needed to reclaim something she had taken long before she packed her suitcase. And yet, I won't lie, a small part of me had hoped, not for reconciliation, but for acknowledgement, for proof that she had once truly known me. But maybe that's the final lesson. Some people leave not because they're incapable of love, but because they never really knew how to carry it when it became heavy. She didn't reply, and I stopped checking. Her silence wasn't cruel anymore. It was just empty, and I had no space left for emptiness in the life I was beginning to rebuild. Recovery was slow, not just in my body but in my spirit. There were mornings I couldn't move without wincing, and nights when sleep came in short, broken intervals. But something had shifted inside me, a quiet strength I hadn't felt in years. I moved in with my sister for a while. She gave me her guest room, filled the fridge with the things I used to love, and most importantly, never asked about Claire. Her kindness was steady, undramatic, and healing in a way medicine couldn't touch. Eventually, I returned to my apartment, alone this time. It was strange at first, walking into silence that wasn't hollow but peaceful. The space felt different. I cleared out the closets, gave away what didn't matter, repainted the walls. Not to erase the past, but to make room for something new. I started teaching online, financial planning courses. Small at first, just 5 or 6 students, then more. People wrote to me, thanked me, said I made things clearer for them. It felt good to be useful again, to be seen. I stopped thinking about the letter, about what she did or didn't feel when she read it. Her name became a closed chapter in my mind, a story I had written, read, and no longer needed to revisit. The illness stayed with me, of course. Some days were harder than others, but I adapted. I learned to live slower, more intentionally. I no longer raced toward anything. I no longer waited for anyone. One afternoon I sat on the balcony, the late sun warming my arms, a glass of tea in my hand. Music played softly from the living room. I looked out over the city and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Stillness, not the kind born from absence, but from presence. From knowing I had survived, not just the illness, not just the abandonment, but the temptation to become bitter. I had chosen a different path, one paved in silence, yes, but also in dignity, and that I realized was the most complete kind of revenge, to live well, without her, without regret, without pain, without regret.